September 10th, 1944. The phone line crackles between Branville, France, and Brussels, Belgium. At Supreme Headquarters, Eisenhower stands with the receiver pressed against his ear, watching his chief of staff across the operations room. The logistics map spread on the table between them shows 3 armies grinding forward across France on supply lines stretched thin as wire. Patton's 3rd Army in Lorraine, Hodges's 1st Army in Belgium, Montgomery's 21st Army Group already receiving more tonnage than anyone else. Then Montgomery's voice cuts through the static with a demand that will either fracture the alliance or redefine it. Give him everything, every supply truck, every gallon of fuel. Halt the American armies completely, or he resigns. Eisenhower's grip tightens on the receiver. Smith stops writing mid-sentence. In the background, the teletype machines continue their mechanical rhythm, oblivious to what's happening. This phone call, this single conversation, is about to decide whether coalition warfare survives contact with ego. But what Montgomery didn't understand, what he fundamentally miscalculated, was that Eisenhower had already made his choice about what mattered more: winning together or losing alone. Montgomery's demand isn't a request. It's political blackmail dressed in strategic language. He wants 100% of Allied supply capacity diverted to 21st Army Group. That's 1,200 tons per day, leaving 300 tons for 3 American armies. Paris civilians requiring 300 tons just to eat, and all maintenance of the 400-meter supply corridor from Normandy. The math is brutal. Current Red Ball Express capacity, 1,500 tons daily. Montgomery already gets 750 tons. De Patton gets 400. Hodges gets 400. Montgomery's proposal would ground 800,000 American troops to fuel his single thrust into Germany. When I cross-referenced Eisenhower's logistics reports with Montgomery's memorandums from this period, the strategic gap becomes obvious. Montgomery believed the war could be won by Christmas 1944 with one concentrated blow, while Shaw planners knew the ports couldn't support a force larger than 12 divisions that far forward. Eisenhower listens as Montgomery delivers his ultimatum with the confidence of Britain's most famous general, Victor of Ellesmere, the man who broke Ramel. He's threatening resignation, certain that political pressure from Churchill will force Eisenhower's hand. "Monty," Eisenhower says, his voice carefully controlled. "Say that again, please." Montgomery repeats it, not asking and telling. Eisenhower puts Montgomery on hold, turns to Smith. The silence between them carries the weight of what comes next. If Eisenhower agrees, he loses Bradley. He loses Patton. He loses the confidence of every American field commander in Europe. If Eisenhower refuses, Montgomery submits his resignation to Churchill. And British newspapers, already being fed leaks from Montgomery's staff, will savage American command competence. Smith's voice is neutral, professional. "Sir, he believes concentrating resources on one thrust will end the war by Christmas. And if it fails, Eisenhower's voice edges upward. Then we've got 3 grounded armies, an exposed flank 200 meters long, and Germans concentrated on one axis." The German military retained a capacity for recovery that Allied intelligence consistently underestimated. In just 3 months, 10 panzer divisions that escaped encirclement in France would reconstitute around veteran cadres and strike back during the Battle of the Bulge. This isn't about supplies anymore. It's about who commands the war. One man wants to command an army. The other man already commands the alliance. But before Eisenhower can make that clear to Montgomery, the crisis is about to escalate beyond anything either of them anticipated. Within 2 hours, Montgomery's cable reaches 10 Downing Street. Not through proper military channels, straight to Churchill. And the message is diplomatically worded, but the meaning cuts clean. Eisenhower's broad front strategy is squandering the victory Montgomery won in Normandy. A concentrated thrust could end the war in weeks, but American caution is allowing Germany time to regroup. Churchill's private secretary, John Colville, records the Prime Minister's reaction in his diary. Monty has just lit a powder keg. By afternoon, British newspapers begin running headlines questioning American strategy. Missed opportunities in France, bold strategy, or cautious crawl. They don't name Eisenhower directly, but the implications land like artillery. The political damage is instantaneous. Eisenhower's immediate reaction is to call General George C. Marshall in Washington. It's 9 a.m. East Coast time. Oz Marshall listens without interrupting, as Eisenhower explains. Montgomery demanding total supply priority. Montgomery threatening resignation. Montgomery circumventing chain of command to pressure Churchill. Marshall's response could freeze hydrogen. If Montgomery resigns, let him. But if you yield to this blackmail, you'll face a revolt from every American general in theater. Patton will go public. Bradley will request relief. This coalition will collapse. Tracking Marshall's correspondence from September 1944 reveals he'd been anticipating exactly this confrontation. His letters to Eisenhower throughout August increasingly emphasized that maintaining coalition unity mattered more than any single operation, no matter how promising. Then Marshall's voice hardens further. Eisenhower, if you need to relieve Montgomery of command, I will support you to the president. But we will not allow British political pressure to dictate American operational sacrifice. Is that clear? Yes, sir. You have full authority. Use it. September 11th, 1944. General Omar Bradley arrives at Eisenhower's headquarters unannounced, having driven through the night from his command post. He's received word through staff channels about Montgomery's ultimatum. Bradley commands 12th Army Group, both Patton's 3rd Army and Hodge's 1st Army. That's 800,000 men. Normally diplomatic, measured, patient. Not today. He walks into Eisenhower's office without ceremony. Ike, if you ground 1st and 3rd Armies to feed Monty's ego, I'm asking for relief. Eisenhower looks up, genuinely surprised. Brad, I mean it. Bradley's voice is flat, final. I won't tell Courtney Hodges his men accomplished nothing while Montgomery gets a parade to Berlin. And I sure as hell won't face George Patton and explain why his tanks sit empty so Montgomery can take credit for winning the war. Eisenhower meets his eyes. I'm not giving Montgomery total supply priority. Then, what are you giving him? I don't know yet. Churchill's flying in tomorrow. This is above our pay grade now. What I found most revealing in Bradley's personal papers was how viscerally he reacted not just to the supply issue, but to what he saw as Montgomery's attempt to subordinate American armies to British command. A pattern Bradley believed he'd seen repeatedly since Normandy. Bradley straightens. Whatever you decide, Ike, remember this. Patton and I have 800,000 men between us. They fought from Normandy to the German border. You ground them for Monty's theory about ending the war by Christmas. You better be damn sure it works, because if it doesn't, we'll have lost 2 months. 3 armies worth of momentum, and the confidence of every American soldier in Europe. He walks out. Eisenhower sits alone. Political pressure from London building. Marshall's given him authority, but also a warning. Bradley just threatened to resign. Montgomery still waiting for an answer. Resignation letter ready. September 12th, 1944. A second memorandum arrives from Montgomery. Eisenhower opens it, expecting another argument about supplies. But what he finds is something far more ambitious. Montgomery now demands that Eisenhower create a new position, a single ground force commander for all Allied armies in Northwest Europe with full operational authority over Bradley, Patton, Hages, everyone. And the memorandum strongly implies the commander should be Montgomery himself. Read that again. Montgomery wants Eisenhower to invent a position above all Army Group commanders, give it complete operational control of the land battle, and hand it to him. Eisenhower would retain only strategic coordination, policy, politics, logistics, not operations. Eisenhower reads it twice, puts it down, looks at Smith. He wants me to fire myself. The document trail from September 1944 shows Montgomery drafted at least 3 versions of this proposal. One more explicit about his belief that Eisenhower, who'd never commanded troops in combat before 1942, should step aside for experienced battlefield leadership. Within hours, British newspapers escalate. Now they're calling openly for experienced battlefield leadership of ground operations. The implication is unmistakable. Eisenhower should step aside for Montgomery, Victor of El Alamein. Churchill cables requesting an urgent meeting. The Prime Minister is caught between his most popular general and his most crucial ally. If he backs Montgomery and Eisenhower refuses, Roosevelt might question British commitment to coalition command. If he backs Eisenhower and Montgomery resigns, British public opinion will explode. Across the Channel, Patton gets wind of Montgomery's ground commander proposal through intelligence intercepts. His diary entry that night later published, "If Ike caves to that insufferable man and makes him ground commander, I'll resign and tell the press exactly why. I won't serve under Montgomery. I'd rather be a colonel under Bradley than a general under that pompous." The rest is unprintable. Even Montgomery's own staff is getting nervous. Major General Francis de Gongand, Montgomery's chief of staff and the most respected British officer among the Americans, approaches Montgomery privately. "Sir," Dwingon says carefully, "this may be going too far. Eisenhower has Washington's complete backing." Dewing's memoir, Operation Victory, published in 1947, is remarkably candid about this moment. He wrote that he opposed Montgomery's narrow front strategy on both political and administrative grounds in U.S., knowing the coalition couldn't survive the tension Montgomery was creating. Montgomery's response is dismissive. Meanwhile, Eisenhower meets with his deputy, British Air Chief Marshal Arthur Teeter, to get a British perspective. Arthur Eisenhower says, "I'm Supreme Commander. Montgomery is trying to reorganize Allied command structure to put himself between me and my armies. If I allow this, I'm not commanding anything. I'm a politician in a chateau." Tedar, who has no love for Montgomery, is blunt. He's overreached Ike, but you need Churchill to understand that before this explodes. In London, Churchill is having the same conversation with Field Marshal Alan Brookie, chief of the Imperial General Staff and Montgomery's strongest supporter. "Alan," Churchill says, "Monty is brilliant but impossible. And if we push this and Eisenhower resigns, Roosevelt will pull American support. We'll lose the war to save Montgomery's pride." Brooke, torn between loyalty to Montgomery and political reality. Prime Minister Monty believes he's right. Believing you're right and being right are two different things. September 14, 1944. Winston Churchill's aircraft lands in France. The Prime Minister meets with Eisenhower privately at SHA headquarters. No aides, no transcripts, no record, except what each man chooses to share afterward. What happens in that room will determine the future of Allied command. Churchill cables the War Cabinet in London that evening with the result. Eisenhower has my full support to maintain his command structure as constituted. But Churchill also asks Eisenhower for something in return. Can you give Montgomery enough to attempt his northern operation? Something to show boldness, something to satisfy British public. Opinion that we're not simply grinding forward slowly. Putting together Churchill's correspondence with his detailed notes from the Versailles Conference later that month. You can see exactly how he triangulated this crisis, supporting Eisenhower's authority while giving Montgomery just enough operational scope to avoid a resignation that would shatter British morale. Eisenhower sees the political solution immediately. Approve Montgomery's Operation Market Garden, the massive airborne assault into Holland that Montgomery's been proposing. Give him supply priority for that specific operation, but reject the permanent command change. Reject the total supply monopoly, a compromise. Montgomery gets his chance to prove his single thrust theory, but on a limited scale with a deadline. If it succeeds, he's proven his point. If it fails, the broad front strategy continues with no more challenges. Churchill agrees. It keeps Montgomery in the fight and gives him no grounds to resign. If Market Garden succeeds, vindication. If it fails, the matter is settled. September 15th, 1944. Morning. Eisenhower picks up the phone, dials Montgomery's headquarters. Field Marshal Montgomery's headquarters. This is General Eisenhower. Put the Field Marshal on. 30 seconds later, Montgomery's voice comes through. Crisp, formal. Good morning, Ike. Monty, I've consulted with General Marshall and met with the Prime Minister yesterday. I'm calling to give you my decision. I'm listening. Eisenhower's voice is measured, but there's steel underneath. You're not getting total supply priority. You're not getting a ground commander position. The command structure stays as is. I command. You command 21st Army Group. Bradley commands 12th Army Group. Silence on the line. Montgomery's voice, when it comes, is stiff. Then I must maintain my position, Ike. Without concentration of resources, we're losing our opportunity to end this war. This is the moment. This is the moment Eisenhower could back down, could offer another compromise, could let political pressure force his hand. He doesn't. Then I'll accept it. The way I interpret this exchange after years of studying coalition command dynamics is that Eisenhower understood Montgomery needed to hear absolute finality. Not negotiation, not compromise, but a door closing. Another silence, longer this time. But before you submit that letter to London, understand this. Eisenhower's voice is colder now. General Marshall has authorized me to relieve you if necessary. The Prime Minister has indicated he won't oppose maintaining current command arrangements. If you resign, I'll appoint General Miles Dempsey to command 21st Army Group and continue operations. The silence that follows is absolute. Montgomery, on the other end of the line, realizes the ground has shifted beneath him. He played his political card, threatened resignation, went to Churchill, mobilized British press pressure. Eisenhower just called the bluff, and Churchill sided with Eisenhower. Montgomery's voice, when it returns, has changed. The certainty is gone. You'd actually accept my resignation. Monty, you're one of the finest commanders in this war. But I'm not reorganizing Allied command under threat. I'm not halting 3 American armies for one operation, and I'm not allowing any subordinate, British or American, to dictate strategy through blackmail. Eisenhower pauses, lets that sink in. So yes, if you resign, I'll accept it. I'll relieve you with regret, and I'll continue the mission. 10 seconds of silence. Smith, standing next to Eisenhower, can hear his own heartbeat. Montgomery's voice comes back. Different tone now, backing down. I see. Then, perhaps, Perhaps I was too forceful in my memorandum. Perhaps, if I may ask, what can you offer for the northern operation? I still believe we have an opportunity in Holland. Eisenhower's voice softened slightly. The compromise? I'll approve Market Garden. I'll give you supply priority for that operation, specifically enough to support 3 airborne divisions and XXX Corps' advance. But Patton and Hodges continue their operations at reduced levels. And after Market Garden concludes, we return to balanced logistics across the front. He pauses. That's my final offer, Monty. Looking back through Montgomery's correspondence after this call, the shift is dramatic. Within 24 hours, he's focusing entirely on Market Garden planning. The resignation letter filed away. The ground commander proposal never mentioned again in official channels. Another pause. Montgomery is calculating. He's lost the battle for total control, but he's being offered one operation, one chance to prove his theory. It's not everything he demanded, but it's something. Very well, Ike. I'll withdraw my resignation, and then I'll make Market Garden succeed with what you can provide. This is it. The moment Eisenhower has been building toward the line that will define this entire crisis. His voice is quiet, but absolutely firm. Monty, you're a great general, one of the greatest. But this is my command. It was given to me by Roosevelt, Churchill, and the combined chiefs of staff. You don't negotiate for it, you don't threaten for it, and you sure as hell don't resign your way into it. Eisenhower lets that hang in the air for a moment. Now, are you going to command 21st Army Group, or do I call General Dempsey? The silence is brief this time. I'll command, sir. Good. I'll have the operations order for Market Garden on your desk by this afternoon. We launch in 72 hours. Eisenhower hangs up, sits back in his chair. Smith is staring at him. Sir Oz, you just faced down the British Empire's most famous general. I just saved the alliance, Eisenhower replies. There's a difference. Combining evidence from Eisenhower's personal files with Marshall's contemporaneous letters, the conclusion becomes clear. This wasn't just about September 1944. It was about establishing an ironclad precedent that would govern Allied operations until Germany surrendered. Montgomery never threatened resignation again. 3 days later, on September 17, 1944, he launched Operation Market Garden. 3 Allied airborne divisions dropped into Holland to seize bridges across multiple rivers. XXX Corps raced up a single highway to relieve them. The plane bounced across the Rhine at Arnhem, outflanked the entire German defensive line, drive into the RER industrial heartland, end the war by Christmas, and it lasted 9 days. The British 1st Airborne Division landed at Arnhem and ran straight into 2 SS Panzer divisions, refitting in the area. Intelligence had missed them. The division was surrounded, cut off. 3 XX Corps couldn't reach them in time. By September 26th, it was over. Of 10,000 men from 1st Airborne who dropped into Arnhem, only 2,000 escaped back across the Rhine. Total Allied casualties, 17,000 men. The bridge at Arnhem, the final objective, never taken. Montgomery's single-thrust theory, tested at operational scale with substantial resources, failed catastrophically. The popular version of Allied strategy in 1944 tends to focus on what didn't happen. The race to Berlin that never was. But what most accounts miss is what this moment revealed about how coalition wars are actually won. Not through brilliant individual plans, but through sustainable collective effort. But here's what didn't happen. 3 American armies sitting idle while Montgomery rolled the dice on a plan that failed anyway. Because while Market Garden collapsed in Holland, the broad front strategy, the one Montgomery called timid, was working. Patton's Third Army, operating on reduced supplies, captured 37,000 German prisoners in Lorraine. Hayes's First Army liberated Luxembourg and pushed into Germany. The broad front kept pressure on Germany across 400 meters. Hitler couldn't concentrate reserves, couldn't rebuild behind a quiet sector. The Allies ground forward slowly, expensively, but inevitably, and the command structure held. Eisenhower never publicly criticized Montgomery, never mentioned the resignation threat in official reports, never used it for political advantage. He preserved Montgomery's reputation, maintained the coalition, and continued the mission. That's coalition command. Not finding the perfect plan, but finding the plan that keeps the alliance together while defeating the enemy. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, it wasn't because of a single brilliant thrust. It was because a dozen Allied armies ground Germany down on every front simultaneously. Eisenhower's broad front strategy, criticized, maligned, called timid, worked. Montgomery personally accepted the German surrender in northern Germany. A proud moment, a fitting end to his command. Eisenhower was elsewhere that day, coordinating the surrender of German forces across the entire Western Front. Every army, every sector, every commander reporting to him. One man commanded an army, the other commanded the war. Bora Hermar. And that's what the phone call on September 15, 1944 decided. Not whether Montgomery got more supplies, whether any subordinate commander, no matter how famous, no matter how politically connected, could threaten, negotiate, or resign their way into control. Eisenhower's answer was no, and that answer held the alliance together long enough to